Welcome, everybody, to another one of our Free Friday community classes right here on the YouTubes. This week, we are doing our monograph of magic and medicine for Echinacea. We just wrapped up an incredible month-long sit with this plant ally. We learned so much about an herb that I really feel gets pigeonholed, into uh, their virtues as an immune stimulant and a remedy ally for cold and flu and infection and all of that. These sits are really an opportunity for us to go beyond the reductionism, beyond the lists of good for, and really engage directly with the spirit of the plant. So I'm excited about all the things that came up and really looking forward to our next sit. So let's get into Echinacea. These are just little sprinklings, little picks from all of the content that goes out for these plant spirit journeys. So by no means is this even close to being exhaustive. It's just some stuff that I find interesting and some bullet points, right? So we're going to talk about nomenclature and etymology as per usual, get into just a little bit of botany, talk about some medicine, talk about some magic, and then a bit about the spirit of Echinacea. So let's get started. Nomenclature and etymology. We believe that the name Echinacea comes from the Greek, the Old Greek specifically, of echinos, meaning hedgehog or sea urchin, right? And if you've never been around Echinacea or coneflower before, this might be new to you, but if you know this flower, totally makes sense, right? We see that spiky, hedgy cone top that totally makes sense that somebody would look at the echinacea flower and say, you know what, that looks like a sea urchin or a hedgehog. So every time we call out to this plant with the name echinacea, there's a reference there to some connection with these spiky animals. A little bit of botany. Echinacea is part of the Asteraceae family, formerly known as Compositae. There's about 32,000 individual species of plants in this family. It's massive. Some that you probably are familiar with: calendula, dandelion, chamomile, artemisias, burdock, arnica, yarrow, sagebrush, and goldenrod. And these botanical similarities, whether they exist on both sides of the hedge or only on the human side of the hedge, who can say? But I will say this, that they're really helpful in encouraging us to learn proper identification and to understand similarities between plants, and even helping us to understand companionship within the plant world, right? That some plants just play well together. They go together. They're resonant and aligned to each other's virtues. So when you look at the botanical expressions of some of these plants, like calendula, for example, it's not a far stretch of the imagination to do a side-by-side of an echinacea flower and a calendula flower and see similarity in how they show up in the world. And without going on too much of a tangent, how a plant shows up in our world, the way they grow, where they grow, how they grow, their colors, their form, the structure of the leaves, of the stem, of the flowers, the taste, the scent, everything about how they show up here is communication, right? Everything about their physical form is an invitation to engage into the deeper spiritual aspect of their spiritual form. So they are books that we absolutely can and should judge by the cover, right? Because they are so fully embodied in personage that when they show up, how they show up is as much communication as these deeper kind of meditative spirit flight aspects of our communication. So, I've met plenty of very left brain botany nerds in my life, and through their botanical work, they have had just as profound communicative experiences with plants as some of the more visionary plant people that I've met. So there you go. The echinacea is a perennial clump, and they clump as they grow. So this is a really good plant if they'll grow where you live. You just start a little stand of them, right? Year one, put a few echinacea in. That's great. Year two, you put more Echinacea in right next to them. And then you have this kind of rotating cycle of perennial crops that come in. And then after 2 or 3 years, you can get down there at the end of the season as the plant starts to die back, and you can separate the roots out a little bit, bring some of the medicine out, and then keep the plants alive, right? Always have this kind of rotating crop of Echinacea, which is really important. Then the aerial parts as well we can work with. Echinacea is also a really important pollinator resource. So these are really great plants to grow in your garden if you want to attract moths and bees and you know, all the different bugs that pollinate, butterflies, of course, and they're just really pretty. Why would you not want these cool plants in your garden if you can grow them? Medicinally, we do work with pretty much the entire plant, at least I do, but I want to focus here just on the root, right? So in our bigger monograph in the plant spirit journey, there's some stuff about the flowers and leaves, but speaking specifically about the root, the energetics are bitter and cool. And this is really, really important because the bitter, cool allies that go this bitter and this cool, this antitoxic cool, we don't have a ton of them here in North America. So the ones that we have, we tend to really obsess about, we tend to be really into, which is why I think one of the reasons why Echinacea is such a popular plant. So bitter cool energetics, the action categories are alterative, vulnerary, and stimulant. So alterative is going to alter the structure and function of the blood, forcing out hot toxicity, infection, dysregulation in the blood. Vulnerary is helping with wounds that are stubborn to heal. People tend to, again, pigeonhole Echinacea as this plant that's good for colds and flus, when I think about Echinacea whenever there's a heat expressing infection. I don't care if it's a sinus infection or if it's an infection in somebody's big toe. This is an herb that I go to when I want that cooling, bitter, toxin driving vulnerary effect. And stimulant, always remember that when we say stimulant in herbalism, we don't mean stimulant like caffeine or an energy drink. We mean that the herb stimulates particular function in the body. It takes a functionality, an organ system or process, and kind of kicks it into gear. It says, hey, go from a 5 to a 10, right? And what I experience with Echinacea, from the tongue buzz all the way into the body settle, is really a systemic stimulation. Echinacea kind of comes in with those beautiful spiky flowers and kind of just kicks the body on. And then as a secondary effect, really acts as an immune system stimulant. So we'll talk about that here in a minute, because that's an important thing. Again, Echinacea, a prized and essential Western cooling herb. We don't have a ton of them, at least ones that are, easy and relatively safe to work with, like Echinacea. So one that's really valuable, really worth getting to know, and just a really beautiful and surprising plant spirit to connect with. Echinacea is a true immunostimulant. Okay, so when you bring Echinacea into your body, one of the things that this plant spirit will do as they move through you is kind of crank up your immunological response. When you have an active infection, a cough, a cold, a flu, a cut, whatever, that's fantastic. Like, we want that kind of support, especially when it's coming through with bitter coolness, because that's going to flush out toxicity, flush out heat, flush out inflammatory, feedback cycles that need to be broken. The issue that I see, and I've seen this more times over my career than I care to even mention, is that because Echinacea has been pigeonholed as an herb that is good for cold and flu or good for the immune system, some people will treat Echinacea like a tonic herb, like a tonic or an adaptogen or rasayan, right? And so as cold and flu season approaches, they will start taking Echinacea every single day because Echinacea is good for your immune system. And Maybe for 3 months that works, or 4 or 5 or 6, depending on how robust the person is and what their adaptive reserves might be, how resilient their immune system is to begin with. And then all of a sudden, they get sick and they catch the cold that's going around, but they get it 3 times worse than everybody else who's had it. And they're pissed off, right? Because they're like, but I've been taking my echinacea every day. And then they come to me and say, well, this stuff doesn't work because I've been taking echinacea for 6 months or a year. Or I've met people that have been taking echinacea for years on end. And now I'm getting sick constantly, right? You are, right? And we could have predicted that. This is the problem with reductionist herbalism when we don't step into the personhood and energetics and complex temperament and personality of the plants. We just look at what an herb is good for and stop there without exploring how or why or when or where, right? We don't look at the relationship. So when you're taking an immunostimulating herb long term, every day taking an herb that comes into the body, goes to the immune system, turns it up to 10. So the immune system's on high alert all day. Next day comes in, the immune system's regulated itself. The herb comes in, turns it from a 5 to a 10, immune stimulated all day long. Eventually the immune system burns out. Eventually it stops having the reserves to be able to be at a 10. So when you actually need it to be at a 10, it can't go above a 3. It's maxed out, it's taxed out, it's fried. And we also ultimately start to lay in a pattern in the immune system that becomes very dysfunctional, and so we have to do reparative work, and it can take a really long time. So please only work with echinacea and other immune stimulating herbs when there's a reason to stimulate. If you think maybe I might be getting a cold, start taking echinacea, and if the next day you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm fine, cool, no harm, no foul. It's these months on end that I worry about for people. Blood cleanser, really good at flushing heat patterns out of the blood when the blood has become inflammatory and filled with heat and toxicity. Really fantastic with wound healing. There are some nuances to stubborn wound healing that we can't go into here, but echinacea is a good place to start. I love echinacea for oral infections. I put echinacea root powder into my tooth powders, into a lot of oral rinses. This herb is really effective at the delicate tissues inside the mouth. And if you've ever had the pleasure of sucking on a little bit of echinacea root, or maybe taking a really expertly crafted echinacea tincture, you get that tongue buzz, right? So there's this really beautiful kind of activating energy in the mouth with this herb that I really like. But at the end of the day, clearing heat and heat-based toxicity in all hot infections, right? This isn't like a atrophied infection or cold infection. This is like hot, painful, red, inflamed infection. This is a go-to herb for me, and a very good one to have in your back pocket. Magic. There's a story that gets passed around a lot in a lot of the Western herbals about a Native American, particularly from the Winnebago group, protection charm, where somebody notes seeing the medicine person sucking on some echinacea root or putting the leaf in their mouth. There's all kinds of various iterations of this story before being able to then successfully pick up a hot coal and put the coal in the mouth, right? Put the coal between the teeth or into the mouth. And how true this is, I don't know. It was really hard for me to even put this on here because I don't know like where the story comes from, but we've been telling it so much. And this is an herb that is so valued among so many of the various Native American groups that I just think it's cool to at least nod that this is a very important herb to those folks and very important part of their living cultures and living plant medicine traditions. So one thing to consider is the bitter coolness of this herb being a counteractant to the heat of the coal, right? Like it's this very visceral thing that I think is kind of cool. I really like working with echinacea for people who are having a hard time discerning self from not self, right? They can't figure out what what of the things that are happening within me, are fully mine, are fully my anger, my resentment, my jealousy. Like, again, because I think about the heated emotions, right? And then what are the things that are maybe being imposed on me, that are like, maybe more part of culture or socioeconomics, or my partner or my work environment, right? To a certain degree, we do identify with those things because we're engaged with them. But echinacea is really helpful at kind of helping people figure out what's really the truth of them, and then like what's everything else. And that everything else is the stuff that ultimately we want to release, we want to let go of, right? We don't want to identify with it, we don't want to sign up for it, we don't want to carry it around in our backpacks. So that of course trickles over into the immunological function of this plant, helping to figure out what should be within us and what should not be. Echinacea, remember Echinos, right? The sea urchin, the hedgehog, very good plant ally of protection, especially those aerial parts. I craft a big batch of a hyssop space clearing, space protecting spray every year with my echinacea crop, and it's the flowers that go in there, right? I want that spiky protective energy. And something about the signature of this plant, that beautiful lilac purple color, right, is an activator of spirit. This is like the purples are always a color that we ascribe to the spirit, the soul, the deep self. So when folks feel like they need a spirit level of protection, right, maybe physically everything's fine, emotionally, mentally things are okay, but there's a desire to have a spiritual level protection. And sometimes, we bring this plant ally in as people are going through various initiations or different, ritual processes to protect the spirit. So you can carry some of the dried herb or a bit of dried root in a sachet with you as a protective charm, or make a protecting spray that you can work with. All of that is very effective. And then heat reactive energy body pickups. So it's a lot of words that mean something very simple. That when you find yourself being influenced by things around you and they generate a heat response, right? So somebody cuts you off in traffic, and instead of being like frustrated or annoyed or concerned, you know, your reaction is like a heat flush, like your face flushes or your palms get sweaty, and you go right into those really fiery emotions, right? Um, Echinacea can be a really beautiful plant to kind of help us create a little space, right? So that we can say, like, oh, isn't it interesting how involved I got in that, right? How I picked up something, like something happened and I like picked it up and then I brought it deep enough into my body to create this like liver response, this like hot, fiery response. And it's not, the medicine is not about don't feel how you feel, but sometimes it is about not every feeling you have is valid, right? Like there's not always a reason to be as angry as we get about things. We can be uh, uncomfortable. We can be, you know, put into a place where things are inconvenient and not react that intensely. So I like echinacea as an herb to kind of help us figure out like where we're picking things up and letting them kind of get too much out of us, right? Get the best of us, I guess is a better way to say that. So the spirit of echinacea, for me, is one of deep protection and is one of checking excess heat. Another herb that we talk about a lot, or that I talk about a lot in my practice for this kind of work, is dandelion. And I think these are the two herbs that come up for me when I see excess heat conditions in somebody, but they're a little different. Dandelion, same Asteraceae family, by the way. Dandelion is gentler, less protective, more about the work, cutting cords, acknowledging what needs to be released, letting things go, right? Like dandelion's kind of about doing the process of breaking through the cracks in the sidewalk as they do. Echinacea is a little more about that kind of stark call out. Like that's the thing that needs to be dealt with. Here's the self, here's the not self, here's the reactive part of this. Can echinacea help us follow through and resolve the things that it shows us? Absolutely. But it really just depends on the person. Some people really like that tongue buzzy, stimulating echinacea medicine when they're doing the work. Other people, and this is very much me, dandelion's more my speed. I like that weedy, earthy kind of just compassionate, well-paced energy of dandelion. But if I see people spinning their tires, if I find myself spinning my tires when there's work to be done, I will not hesitate to bring in a little bit of echinacea and fire things up a little bit, get some of that alternative energy in there to alter the current state of things, right? We think about alternatives in pop herbalism as blood cleansers, right? And that to a certain degree is true. But think about the word alter, right? That we're changing the state of something, we're altering something. So alternatives do have an affinity with the blood. So if the blood is flowing or expressing in a way spiritually, that isn't on point, right? It's just not the right direction. We want to alter that. And that's where we could bring in some of these little more fiery, little more intense allies. I shouldn't say fiery because there's no heat in this plant, but fiery in the sense that echinacea is transformative and will change the state of things, right? So I really appreciate that. With that, we do our monthly plant spirit journeys. They start the day after every new moon, different plant all the time. You get a big digital bundle filled with all kinds of goodies, and you get a whole month to sit in community with a bunch of people around the world hanging out with one plant. And you know what? This is how you learn herbs. If you want to learn beyond memorizing lists of what herbs are good for, and you want to go into the deep heart of plant medicine, this is how to do it. So over on my Patreon, we do the plant spirit journeys. We have monthly advanced classes. I just posted one this week on the magic and medicine of taste, how the taste of an herb tells us something about their medicinal effects and their magical effects. We are always doing courses in green magic and medicine. Right now, we're in the middle of a course on respiratory wellness with herbs. I do case studies, we do book clubs, and it's just an incredible community. So if you like this stuff and you want more, you're liking what's happening here on the YouTube, which will always be free. This is like, probably 30% of the content I put out actually goes on YouTube. The rest of it is over on Patreon. So come over and hang out with us. I'd love to see you there. With that, I'll send you out with echinacea, hedgehog, sea urchin, blessings of peace and plenty. I'll see you next time.